If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel that your steady nature was a flaw rather than a strength, if you've ever dreamed of proving someone wrong by becoming the most authentic version of yourself, then hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready for one of the most satisfying transformation stories you'll hear today. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about hurting someone who hurt you. It's about becoming so thoroughly yourself that their opinion no longer matters. We'd been together for 2 years, long enough that people stopped asking how we met, long enough that routines replaced effort, long enough that I thought comfort meant safety. We met at a friend's wedding, bonded over dry chicken and warm champagne, laughing in the corner like we'd known each other longer than a single night. She was charming in an effortless way, confident, ambitious, the kind of woman people naturally gravitated toward. I was steady, reliable, the kind of person who showed up when they said they would. At the time, I thought that balance was love. That Tuesday night in April, we were sitting on her couch watching a reality show she liked. I don't even remember what it was. Something loud and dramatic. Contestants crying over manufactured chaos. She muted the TV. I noticed the silence before the words. "Franks," she said, folding her hands like this was a meeting. "I don't think this is working anymore." The room tilted just slightly. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested this conversation was more exhausting for her than devastating for me. "You're a great person," she said. "Really? But you're predictable." Predictable. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with judgment. You work a 9 to 5. You go to the gym the same days, every week. You wear the same clothes. Order the same food. Plan everything in advance. You're safe. I waited for the rest. Safe isn't continued. I am chigiste chfarte. I want more. I want someone extraordinary. Extraordinary? The word echoed in the suddenly silent room. "So, this is about someone else?" I asked. "No," she said too quickly. "This is about me not wanting to settle." Then she laughed. Actually laughed. Not cruelly worse. Casually, like she was commenting on the weather, instead of dismantling a future we'd been building. I stood. "You're right," I said calmly. "I'm not your type." "Elena, don't be dramatic." "This isn't dramatic," I replied, reaching for my jacket. "This is clarity." I walked out while she was still explaining herself. The drive home was quiet. No tears, no screaming, just a strange stillness. When I got inside my apartment, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. Not critically, not kindly, honestly. Then I grabbed a notebook and I wrote down everything she said I wasn't. Exciting, passionate, risk-taking, extraordinary. I didn't know it yet, but that list was about to change everything. I didn't wake up the next morning transformed. There was no dramatic montage, no sudden confidence, no overnight glow-up that made strangers stop and stare. What I woke up with was resolve, the kind that sits quietly in your chest and refuses to leave. I went to work like normal, answered emails, sat through meetings, nodded at jokes that weren't funny. From the outside, nothing had changed. But underneath it, something had cracked open. That list, the one I had written the night before, I folded it and tucked it into my wallet. Not as a reminder of her, but as a record of how small I'd allowed myself to live. The first change wasn't dramatic. It was discipline. I'd always gone to the gym, but casually. Maintenance, comfort, the same machines, the same pace, the same excuses. This time, I hired a trainer. His name was Daniel, and he didn't care that I was tired or that my form wasn't perfect or that brutal. My muscles burned. My confidence lagged behind my effort. I wanted to quit more than once. I didn't. By the 3rd month, my body felt different. Not just stronger, but capable, like it could carry more weight than I'd ever asked of it before. The second change was how I presented myself. I donated half my closet, not because there was anything wrong with my clothes, but because they were chosen for invisibility. Neutral, safe, unremarkable. I worked with a stylist for the first time in my life, someone who asked me questions no one ever had before. How do you want to feel when you walk into a room? I didn't say noticed. I said, confident. The woman who walked out of that fitting room still looked like me, but sharper, intentional, unapologetic. The third change was the one that scared me the most. I quit my job. Not impulsively, not recklessly. I planned, I saved. I built a client list quietly on nights and weekends. I'd always wanted to start my own consulting practice, but stability had kept me frozen. 3 months after the breakup, I handed in my notice. The fear was immediate. So was the exhilaration. I said yes to things I'd always postponed. A spontaneous road trip, a language class, a climbing gym, even though heights terrified me. I wasn't chasing chaos. I was chasing presence. By September, I barely recognized my life. And that's when I met Noah. It was at a networking event, one I almost skipped because I was tired. She wasn't flashy. He didn't dominate the room. She listened. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Work, ambition, failure, the things people don't usually admit out loud. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered details. When he handed me his card, he didn't push. I'd like to take you to dinner, she said, if you're interested. I was. Our first date wasn't loud or dramatic. It was easy, and for the first time in a long time, easy didn't feel like settling. It felt like alignment. By October, we were officially together. And the strangest part, I didn't feel like I was proving anything anymore. I felt like I'd finally arrived. Success doesn't arrive with fireworks. It slips in quietly, almost politely, and then one day you look around and realize your life no longer resembles the one you were afraid to lose. By November, my business was stable, not just surviving, growing. I'd signed 3 long-term clients. I was fielding inquiries instead of chasing them. I hired a part-time assistant and started looking at office space instead of working exclusively from my kitchen table. I was busy in a way that felt purposeful, not draining. Noah fit into that life effortlessly. She didn't compete with my ambition or diminish it. She asked questions, celebrated wins I hadn't even thought to celebrate myself, reminded me to eat when I forgot. One night, while we were cooking dinner together, he said, "You know what I like most about you?" I smiled. "I'm afraid to ask." "You're brave," he said simply, "but you don't perform it. You just live it." I didn't tell him then how close I'd come to never discovering that part of myself. The past found me anyway. It started small. A mutual friend mentioned my ex-girlfriend had asked about me at a bar. Another said she'd been unusually quiet lately, that she'd left her job, that things hadn't turned out the way she'd expected. I felt nothing until the doorman called up one Thursday afternoon. "There's a woman here asking for you," she said. "Says she knows you." I almost said no. Curiosity won. When I opened my door, she looked different, thinner, tired, like someone who'd been chasing something that kept moving further away. "Franks," she said softly. "Thanks for seeing me. What do you want?" I asked, staying in the doorway. She swallowed. "To apologize." I waited. "I was wrong," she said. "About you, about everything." She talked for several minutes about fear, about mistakes, about how she'd confused excitement with instability. "I miss you," she said finally. "I want another chance." I felt something then. Not anger. Clarity. "I'm happy," I said, "and I won't shrink myself again to make someone feel bigger." She nodded slowly, like she'd known the answer before she asked. "I see you now," she said. "I know," I replied. "But you're too late." When I closed the door, my hands weren't shaking. That was how I knew I'd truly moved on. December arrived quietly, wrapped in deadlines, early sunsets, and the kind of cold that makes everything feel sharper. Noah and I had been together just over 3 months. Long enough to feel solid. Short enough that everything still felt intentional, not rushed, not assumed. For his birthday, I'd made reservations at a restaurant downtown I'd been wanting to try for years. White tablecloths, soft lighting, the kind of place you plan weeks ahead for. We were seated near the window, city lights reflecting off polished glass. Noah looked relaxed, happy, comfortable in a way that didn't dull the edges of who he was. Halfway through our appetizers, I felt it, that instinctive shift in the air. I looked up, and there she was, my ex, standing near the entrance with a woman on her arm. She was polished, stylish, laughing a little too loudly. She looked tense. Our eyes met. The recognition was immediate. Noah followed my gaze. Is that? Yes, I said quietly. That's her. He didn't ask anything else. Just reached across the table and laced his fingers through mine. We kept talking, kept eating, kept laughing. And that, right there, was the real victory. A few minutes later, my ex approached our table. Elena, she said. E. I looked up slowly. E. Her eyes flicked to Noah. I didn't know you were here. It's Noah's birthday, I said. We're celebrating. Noah stood and offered his hand. Nice to meet you. The handshake was firm, unthreatened. My ex nodded, clearly recalculating. Well, she said finally, you look incredible. Thank Stretched. I should go, she said. Yes, I agreed gently. She walked back to her table without looking back. The rest of the evening was perfect, not because of her, but because she no longer mattered. 6 months later, Noah and I were talking about moving in together. My business had grown enough that I was hiring again. I'd booked a trip I'd once only talked about taking someday. I ran into my ex one last time at a coffee shop in March. She smiled politely, asked how I was. Good, I said. Really good. She nodded. You were never ordinary. I smiled, not for her, but for myself. I know some chapters don't need dramatic endings. They just need to stay closed. The most satisfying moment wasn't when my ex came crawling back, or when she saw me with Noah at that restaurant. The real payoff was quieter, more personal. It happened one morning as I was getting ready for a meeting with a potential new client. I caught my reflection in the mirror and saw a woman who looked confident, capable, vibrant. A woman who took risks, who spoke her mind, who built her own success from the ground up. A woman who was, in every sense of the word, extraordinary. And I realized that I had become everything she said I wasn't, not to prove her wrong, but because I wanted to become these things for myself. The revenge wasn't in her regret, it was in my transformation. The ultimate payoff was looking at myself and knowing, without a shadow of doubt, that her leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me. People often think revenge is about making someone else suffer for what they did to you. But the most satisfying revenge isn't about hurting someone who hurt you. It's about becoming so thoroughly yourself that their opinion no longer matters. My ex didn't break me. She cracked me open just enough to let the light in. She called me predictable, safe, ordinary. Words meant to wound me, but instead they became the foundation I rebuilt myself upon. The irony is that in seeking someone extraordinary, she pushed me to become exactly that, just not for her. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is their departure. Not because it frees you to find someone better, but because it frees you to find yourself. That final, quiet encounter in the coffee shop felt like the period at the end of a very long sentence. I walked out feeling a sense of finality, a peaceful certainty that the chapter was not just closed, but the entire book had been archived away in the deep storage of my mind. Life, as they say, moved on. Noah and I found the perfect apartment, a sun-drenched loft space with exposed brick and a view of the city skyline that made me feel like I was on top of the world, which in a way I was. Moving in with him was seamless, a dance of shared spaces and intertwined lives that felt less like a compromise and more like a completion. We fell into a new rhythm, one that was comfortable but never complacent, a stark contrast to the suffocating comfort I had mistaken for love with Sarah. My business, too, was entering a new phase. The part-time assistant, a brilliant young woman named Chloe, had become indispensable, and I was finally signing the lease on a small but stylish office space in a building that housed other creatives and entrepreneurs. I was no longer just Elena, the consultant. I was Elena, the founder. I was building something tangible, something that was entirely mine, and the thrill of it was a constant, humming energy in my veins. I thought of Sarah less and less, her image fading like an old photograph left in the sun. The first sign that she wasn't ready to let go was a LinkedIn request. It was a small, digital thing, easily ignored, and I did just that, clicking ignore without a second thought. A week later, an email arrived in my business account. The subject line was simply, "Congratulations." The body of the email was short, almost stilted. She'd seen the announcement about my new office on social media. She wrote that she was proud of me, that she always knew I had it in me, a blatant rewriting of history that made my jaw tighten. I deleted it. Then came the Instagram follow. She didn't just follow my public business profile. She found my private, personal one, the one I use for photos with Noah, of our new puppy, of lazy Sunday mornings. The follow request sat there, a tiny, red notification that felt like a knock on a door I had already locked. I denied it, blocking her account for good measure. I told Noah about it one evening while we were unpacking boxes in the new office. He listened, his expression calm and serious, as he taped up a box labeled client files. "She's seeing your life from the outside, Elena," he said, his voice steady. "And it looks a lot better than hers. Don't let her peek through the window. Just draw the curtains." His words were a comfort, a reminder of the solid ground I now stood on. But the curtain drawing felt passive, and I was no longer a passive person. The escalation, when it came, was both subtle and shocking. Chloe, my assistant, came into my office one afternoon, a puzzled look on her face. "Elena, did you know a Sarah Jenkins?" The name hit me like a splash of ice water. I did. What? She called here a few times last week asking about her services. I gave her the standard information, but then today she called and asked some weird questions. She wanted to know if you were hiring, what the company culture was like, if the founder was approachable. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a digital breadcrumb trail. She was actively trying to infiltrate my world, to get close to the life I had built. The thought of her walking into my office, of her voice in my space, was nauseating. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Noah, the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling, and felt a cold anger I hadn't experienced since the night she'd laughed while breaking my heart. This was different, though. It wasn't the anger of a wounded victim. It was the protective fury of a lioness whose den is being threatened. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I had built this fortress, brick by painful, glorious brick, and I would not let someone who had tried to burn it down now stroll through the gates. The next morning, I had Chloe schedule a new client consultation for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. The name on the calendar was simply S. Jenkins. I spent the weekend not in fear, but in preparation. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for a performance. The ultimate performance of my new life. On Tuesday, I wore my power suit, a sharp, navy blue pantsuit I'd bought after signing my first major client. I walked into my own office with the confidence of a queen entering her throne room. At 1:58 p.m., Chloe buzzed me. "Your 2 p.m. is here. Send her in, Chloe," I said, my voice clear and steady. The door opened, and there she was. Sarah. She looked just as she had in the coffee shop, but with a new, desperate layer of polish, like she was trying on a version of me that didn't fit. Her eyes widened when she saw me sitting behind the large oak desk, my name, Elena Voss, founder, engraved on a small brass plate. She had expected to be meeting with an assistant, perhaps. She had not expected to be facing me directly in my seat of power. "Elena," she breathed, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "Sarah," I replied, my tone neutral, professional. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer my hand. I simply gestured to the chair on the other side of my desk. Please have a seat. She sat, her posture rigid, her hands clutching a leather portfolio that I was certain was empty. I didn't realize you'd be conducting the consultation yourself, she stammered. I handle all new client inquiries personally, I said, leaning back slightly in my chair. It's important to me to understand the vision of everyone who wants to be a part of this company. So, tell me, Sarah, what is your vision? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. She was trapped. She had come here under false pretenses, and now she had to perform. She stumbled through a half-hearted pitch about a hypothetical company, her eyes darting around the room, taking in the art on the walls, the photos of me and Noah on my desk, the sheer, undeniable reality of my success. I let her finish. When she was done, there was a long, silent pause. I let it stretch, letting the weight of her deception settle in the room. That's a very interesting concept, I said finally, my voice dropping to a quieter, more intimate, and infinitely more dangerous tone. But I don't think you're here to discuss business. Are you, Sarah? Her face crumpled. The facade shattered. Elena, please, she whispered, the desperation finally spilling out. I just wanted to see you. I wanted to be near you again. I see your life, and it's everything I thought I wanted. Everything we could have had. I felt a surge of something, but it wasn't pity. It was clarity. So clear it was almost blinding. No, I said, my voice soft but firm as steel. You don't get to say we. You didn't want this. You wanted exciting. You wanted extraordinary. You wanted chaos and drama, and someone who made you feel alive with instability. You built a cage and called it an adventure, and when I didn't want to live in it, you threw me away. You didn't want a partner, Sarah. You wanted an accessory for a life you were too afraid to build yourself. I stood up then and walked around the desk, perching on the edge in front of her, forcing her to look up at me. This, I said, gesturing to the office, to my name on the door, this isn't for you. This isn't a performance to make you regret your choices. This is the result of me finally choosing myself. This extraordinary life you say you wanted, I built it. Not for you, not for revenge, but for me. And the woman who built this doesn't have time for ghosts. I stood. Up and walked to the door, holding it open. Chloe will see you out. I'd wish you luck, Sarah. I really would. But luck has nothing to do with it. You have to build your own. And you can't build yours by trying to live in mine. I didn't watch her leave. I closed the door behind her, the click of the latch sounding like the final, definitive sealing of a tomb. I walked back to my desk, my hand steady, my heart calm. The revenge wasn't in the confrontation. It was in the fact that it didn't break my stride. It was in the fact that an hour later, I was on a call with a potential client from Tokyo, negotiating a six-figure contract, the entire encounter with Sarah already feeling like a distant, irrelevant memory. The real victory was that she had tried to start a fire in my world, and all she had done was remind me that I was the one who owned the flame, and I had better things to burn for. The silence that followed Sarah's departure was not empty. It was full. It was the sound of a chapter closing not with a bang, but with the satisfying, final click of a vault door sealing. I stood in the center of my office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, and I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I felt a profound and unshakable sense of peace. It was the feeling of a marathon runner who has crossed the finish line, muscles burning, lungs heaving, but with the deep, cellular knowledge that the race is over. There was no more running. There was no more looking over my shoulder. I had faced the ghost, spoken its name, and watched it dissipate in the light of my own reality. I walked to the large window and looked out at the city sprawling beneath me, a tapestry of a million lives, a million stories. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly a part of it, not just an observer. I was no longer the woman on the couch, a passive character in someone else's drama. I was the architect of my own skyline. That evening, when I got home, the scent of garlic and tomatoes filled the apartment. Noah was in the kitchen, his back to me, humming along to a record on the turntable. He didn't turn around, but he said, "How was your day, boss?" I walked up behind him and wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my cheek against the solid warmth of his back. "It was conclusive," I said. He stopped humming and turned in my arms, his hands resting on my hips, his eyes searching mine. "She came to the office, didn't she?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded. "I handled it." A small, proud smile touched his lips. "I have no doubt." We stood there for a long moment, the music playing softly, the sauce simmering on the stove. "How are you really?" he pressed, his thumb stroking my side. "Tired," I admitted, the word feeling heavy and true, but in a good way, like a fever finally broke. I think I'm finally free." He leaned down and kissed me, a kiss that wasn't about passion or urgency, but about presence. It was a kiss that said, "I'm here. I see you. I've been here all along." And in that moment, I knew that the greatest reward for my transformation wasn't the business success or the stylish apartment or even the quiet satisfaction of seeing Sarah's regret. It was this. It was coming home to a love that didn't require me to be anything other than exactly who I was. The weeks that followed were a cascade of the kind of success I used to only dream about. The deal with the Tokyo client was signed, a multi-year partnership that not only secured my company's financial future, but also put our name on the international map. I hired 2 more employees, bright, ambitious people who were drawn to the company culture I had intentionally built, one of collaboration, respect, and quiet confidence. We moved out of the small office and into a larger one that took up half a floor, with a panoramic view of the river. My life was expanding like a deep, steady breath. One rainy Saturday, while Noah was at the hardware store, I was cleaning out an old desk in the corner of our bedroom, a desk I hadn't used since I started the business. Tucked in the back of a drawer, beneath expired gift cards and stray pins, was my old wallet. I almost tossed it in the donation bag, but something made me open it. And there, folded into a tiny, worn square, was the list. The paper was soft, the ink slightly smudged. I unfolded it and read the words Sarah had used to wound me, the words that had become my war cry. Asterisk exciting, passionate, risk-taking, extraordinary. Asterisk I looked at them for a long time, and instead of the old sting of anger, I felt a strange sense of gratitude. She had handed me a blueprint, not of my flaws, but of my potential. I took the list, walked over to the fireplace, and without ceremony, I lit it with a match. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the words disappearing into smoke and ash. I didn't need a list of what I wasn't anymore. I was living it. My final, true sight of Sarah happened months later, on a warm Sunday in June. Noah and I were at an outdoor art fair, browsing through paintings and sculptures, our fingers laced together. We were laughing about a particularly abstract sculpture that looked like a giant metal pretzel when I saw her. She was across the crowded square, and I would have missed her if not for the distinctive, sharp sound of her laugh. It was just as I remembered it, loud, a little forced, designed to draw attention. She was with a man who was everything she had once claimed to want. Flashy, with an expensive watch and a blazer worn over a t-shirt, gesticulating wildly as he told the story. He was performing, and she was his rapt audience. But as I watched, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a frantic energy around her, a desperation in the way she hung on his every word, as if she was trying to convince herself that this Was it? This was the excitement. This was the extraordinary life she had chosen. She looked like she was running on a treadmill, going faster and faster, but staying in exactly the same place. I felt no surge of victory, no smug satisfaction. I just felt a distant sort of pity, not for her, but for the version of me she had tried to create. I saw the path I had narrowly avoided, a path of constant motion without any forward momentum. Noah felt me tense and followed my gaze. "Is that her?" he asked quietly. I turned away from the scene, back to the man who held my hand, whose presence was a calm harbor in any storm. "It was," I said, and then I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "But it's not anymore." We walked away, leaving the sound of her frantic laughter behind us, and I didn't look back. The revenge was never about her. It was about me. It was about building a life so full, so authentic, so quietly extraordinary that the ghosts of the past couldn't find a single shadow to hide in. And as we stepped out into the sunlight, I realized that the best part of this whole story wasn't the payoff. It was the peace. It was the contentment. It was the simple, profound joy of knowing that I was finally and completely home. Life, in the wake of that final, quiet confrontation, settled into a rhythm that was both exhilarating and deeply serene. It was the rhythm of a life that is truly your own. Mornings began not with the blare of an alarm clock, but with the soft, gray light of dawn filtering through the loft windows, often accompanied by the wet, happy snores of our golden retriever Leo. Noah would already be up, the rich aroma of coffee beans grinding a familiar and comforting soundtrack to the start of my day. We'd talk over coffee, not about the mundane logistics of shared life, but about ideas, about the book he was writing, about the new challenges my company was facing, about the strange, beautiful, and sometimes terrible. People did to find their place in the world. He never treated my success as a threat. He celebrated it as a natural extension of the woman he had fallen in love with. He was my anchor, not in the sense of holding me in one place, but in the sense of being the solid, unwavering weight that kept me grounded when the winds of success threatened to sweep me away. My business, Voss Consulting, was no longer just my name on a door. It was a brand, a reputation for quiet excellence and unshakable integrity. We were the firm you called when you had a problem that wasn't just about numbers, but about people. We didn't just restructure companies. We rebuilt cultures. I had a team of 12 brilliant minds, each one chosen not just for their skill, but for their character. We were a family, and I was the reluctant, proud matriarch. I had everything I had ever fought for, and more. The list I had burned in the fireplace was no longer a set of goals to be achieved, but a simple description of my Tuesday. I was passionate about my work. I took calculated risks in business that paid off. I led a life that, from the outside, certainly looked extraordinary. But the most extraordinary part was how ordinary it felt. It felt like coming home. The first crack in this perfect, peaceful facade appeared as a single, innocuous headline on a business news app one skimmed while waiting for a meeting. Tech startup Innovate Dynamics implodes amidst fraud allegations. CEO vanishes. I almost scrolled past it. The world of tech startups was a volatile one, and this story was tragically common. But a photo accompanied the article, a headshot of the CEO, and my blood ran cold. It was him, the man from the art fair, the man with the expensive watch and the performative laugh. Sarah's extraordinary new life. I read the article with a sick, sinking feeling. The allegations were damning. He had been running a Ponzi scheme, using new investor money to pay off old investors, all while funding A. Lavish lifestyle of private jets, designer clothes, and expensive art. And now he was gone, having vanished with millions, leaving behind a trail of financial ruin and shattered lives. My first thought wasn't a triumph. It was of Sarah. I hadn't spoken to her, hadn't even thought of her in months, but the image of her desperate, laughing face flashed in my mind. I felt a pang of something sharp and uncomfortable. Not pity, not exactly, but a profound sadness for the waste of it all. The desperate chase for a glittering facade had led her straight off a cliff. I put my phone away, trying to shake the feeling, but the story clung to me like a damp fog. That night, I told Noah about it. We were sitting on the couch, Leo's head resting on my lap. He listened, his brow furrowed with concern. "Wow," he said when I was finished. "That's a lot." "I know," I said, stroking Leo's soft ears. "I can't stop thinking about her. How desperate she must have been to fall for something like that. Or how blinded," Noah said gently. "She wanted to believe the fantasy so badly. She ignored all the red flags." He was right, of course, but it didn't make me feel any better. The story felt like a dark shadow reaching from my past, trying to touch the bright light of my present. A week later, the shadow became tangible. I received an email from a senior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. They were representing the board of Innovate Dynamics, the victims of the fraud who were trying to pick up the pieces. They had, the email said, heard of Voss Consulting's reputation for handling complex corporate turnarounds with discretion and skill. They want to know if I would be interested in leading the operational audit and restructuring process. It was the kind of project that could elevate my firm to an entirely new level. It was a career-defining opportunity, and it was inextricably linked to the biggest mistake of Sarah's life. I stared at the email, my heart. Pounding. This was it. The ultimate test. The universe was offering me the chance to literally step into the wreckage of the life Sarah had chosen over me, to profit from it, to clean it up. A part of me, a dark, whispering part one thought I had extinguished, felt a flicker of savage satisfaction. Asterisk, look what you could have had. Look what you chose instead. But the louder, stronger part of me felt a deep sense of unease. This wasn't just a business opportunity. It was a moral and emotional minefield. I called Noah into my office and read him the email. He was quiet for a long time after I finished, his expression unreadable. "What are you thinking?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that this is a trap." "A trap?" "Not a malicious one," he clarified. "An emotional one. Elena, you spent 2 years building a fortress around your heart to keep this exact kind of drama out. And now, the biggest opportunity of your career is a Trojan horse filled with it. Are you sure you won't let that horse inside the walls?" His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't questioning my ability. He was questioning my peace. He was afraid that in the process of cleaning up their mess, I would get dirty again. "This isn't about her," I said, the words sounding defensive even to my own ears. "This is about business, about taking a failing company and making it viable again. It's what I do." "I know," he said, his voice softening. He came around the desk and knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. "And I know you're the best person in the world to do it. I'm just worried about the cost. Not the financial cost, the personal one. I don't want to watch you get dragged back into her world, even as a spectator. You deserve better than that." I looked into his eyes, and I saw the depth of his love and his fear for me. He was right. It was a risk. But as I looked at the email on my screen, I saw something else. I saw a chance to close. The loop, not with anger or revenge, but with competence. To show myself, once and for all, that I could walk through the fire of my past without getting burned. I have to do it, Noah, I said, my voice firm. Not for her. Not for them. For me. I need to know that I can look at this, all of it, and feel nothing. I need to know that my peace is so solid that not even this can shake it. He searched my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Okay, he said, but you're not doing it alone. I'm here, every step of the way. I squeezed his hands, a wave of gratitude and love washing over me. I was about to walk into the heart of the storm, but for the first time, I knew I wouldn't be walking alone. The first day I walked into the Innovate Dynamics offices, the air itself felt heavy with the weight of broken promises. It was a space designed to scream disruptive and visionary, with exposed ductwork, neon-accented walls, and a sprawling open-plan layout. But now, the silence was the most disruptive element. The desks, once buzzing with the frantic energy of creation, were now mausoleums of abandoned dreams. A half-empty mug of coffee sat next to a keyboard, a sticky note with a forgotten idea fluttering in the slight breeze from the air conditioning. The most expensive espresso machine I had ever seen had a for sale, make offer sign taped to it, a sad, final epitaph for a culture built on caffeine and hubris. I was met not by a receptionist, but by Marcus Thorne, the senior partner from the law firm. He was a man in his late 60s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by years of handling other people's disasters. He didn't smile. He simply nodded, his eyes sharp and assessing. Ms. Voss, he said, his voice a low rumble. Glad you're here. This place is a cesspool, and we need you to be the drain. I appreciated his directness. Show me the corner office that had once belonged to the vanished CEO. It was sterile, already cleaned out by the authorities, but the arrogance still lingered in the air like a bad cologne. His name was Julian Croft, Marcus said, standing by the window, looking down at the city below. Charismatic, brilliant, a complete and utter sociopath. He sold these people, investors and employees alike, a vision of the future. Turns out, the future was funded with imaginary money. I walked around the large, empty desk, my heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. I ran my hand over the back of the ergonomic leather chair. Where are the financial records? I asked. All digital, Marcus said, gesturing to a sleek laptop on the desk. The feds have imaged everything, but they've given us access to a sandbox version. It's a mess. Shell companies, offshore accounts, invoices for services that were never rendered. It's a house of cards built out of lies. Good, I said, sitting down in the CEO's chair. It felt surprisingly comfortable. I like a puzzle. My first week was a deep dive into the digital wreckage. I worked long hours, often the last one to leave, the only light in the vast, dark office coming from the lamp on my desk. I wasn't just looking at numbers. I was looking at a story of human greed and gullibility. I built a team, pulling in my best analysts, and we started to untangle the web Julian Croft had spun. It was during one of these late nights that I met Maya. She was a lead programmer, one of the few original employees who had agreed to stay on as a temporary consultant to help with the transition. She was young, maybe 25, with intelligent eyes that held a deep, weary disillusionment. She brought me a cup of tea, placing it on my desk with a trembling hand. I can't believe you're here, she said softly. Imin, I'm glad. It's just seeing someone actually trying to fix things instead of just pointing fingers. Someone has to, I said, offering her a small smile. We all believed in him, she continued, her gaze drifting toward the empty office. Julian, he made you feel like you were part of something revolutionary, like you were one of the chosen ones. He had this circle, people who got the private jets, the invitations to his house in the Hamptons. They were the ones who really drank the Kool-Aid. She paused, her expression darkening. His girlfriend was the worst. Sarah. The name landed in the quiet room like a stone. I kept my face neutral, my fingers stilling on the keyboard. Sarah Jenkins? Maya asked, looking at me. You know her, I gave a slight, non-committal nod. I've heard the name. She was like his high priestess, Maya said, a bitter edge to her voice. She wasn't an employee, but she was always here, whispering in his ear, laughing at his jokes, looking down on the rest of us like we were just worker bees. She loved the lifestyle, the parties, the clothes, the attention. She completely bought into the myth. I wonder how she's feeling now, knowing it was all built on nothing. I didn't answer. I just made a note on a pad. S. Jenkins, personal relationship with Croft, potential access to personal accounts/lifestyle. To Maya, it was a professional note. To me, it was a line drawn in the sand. 2 weeks into the project, I was deep in the weeds of a complex series of transactions involving a shell company in the Cayman Islands. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and the office was a cavern of shadows. I was so focused I didn't hear the elevator ding. I didn't hear the hesitant footsteps approaching the office. The first thing I knew of her presence was a scent, a cloying, expensive perfume I used to smell on my own pillows, a scent I had forced myself to forget. I didn't look up immediately. I finished typing the line of code I was working on, saved the file, and then slowly, deliberately raised my head. She was standing in the doorway of the CEO's office, silhouetted against the dim light of the outer office. She looked small. The polished, confident woman from the art fair was gone, replaced by a figure frayed at the edges. She wore a designer tracksuit, but it looked wrinkled, and her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face, without the shield of makeup, was pale and drawn. Her eyes, the ones that used to sparkle with ambition, were now dull and haunted. She was looking at me, but it wasn't a look of recognition. It was a look of utter confusion. She saw a woman sitting in Julian's chair, bathed in the glow of a laptop, a woman who looked like she belonged there. She saw the nameplate on the desk, which I had put there myself. Elena Voss, CEO, Voss Consulting. The confusion in her eyes slowly, painfully, morphed into dawning horror. "Elena," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What were you doing here?" I leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking softly under my weight. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I let the silence stretch, letting her absorb the full, crushing weight of the situation. I was not a ghost from her past. I was the present. I was the future. I was the one cleaning up her mess. "I work here, Sarah," I said finally, my voice calm, level, and as cold and hard as the granite of Marcus Thorne's face. "I'm a surgeon." If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell us in the comments. What's the most satisfying transformation you've ever experienced or witnessed? And of course, subscribe for more stories like this, where ordinary people become extraordinary in the most unexpected ways. Remember, the best revenge isn't about hurting those who hurt you. It's about becoming so completely yourself that their judgment no longer has power over you. Until next time, keep growing, keep evolving, and keep becoming the most authentic version of yourself, regardless of what anyone else thinks you should be. The words hung in the air between us. I'm the surgeon, and I watched them land on Sarah with the physical force of a blow. Her face, already pale, went the color of old paper. A sound escaped her, a small, strangled gasp, as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. She took a half step back, her hand flying to her throat, a gesture of pure, primal shock. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the server room down the hall. I didn't move. I didn't offer her a seat. I didn't offer her a word of comfort. I simply watched her process the absolute, soul-crushing irony of the situation. The woman she had discarded for being too safe, too predictable, was now the one person with the power to sift through the ashes of the extraordinary life she had so desperately craved. "You," she finally managed to stammer, her voice a hoarse whisper. "You're the one they hired?" "I am," I said, my voice devoid of any inflection. "Voss Consulting is leading the operational restructuring." She seemed to shrink, her shoulders slumping as the weight of her own reality crashed down on her. The designer tracksuit suddenly looked less like a fashion choice and more like a costume she could no longer fill. I didn't know," she said, her eyes darting around the office, as if looking for an escape route. "I just came to get something." She swimming in unshed tears, trying to forge a connection, to appeal to a history that no longer had any currency with me. She was trying to make me her savior, the one person who could give her a small piece of her broken world back. And in that moment, I felt the last, lingering vestige of our shared past dissolve into nothing. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I felt a profound and clinical sense of clarity. This was the final test. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I said, and the words were genuine, but not for the reason she thought. I was sorry for the woman she had become, for the choices she had made. "But I can't help you." Her face crumpled. "Why not? It's mine. It has nothing to do with the company. Everything in this building, every asset, every piece of paper, every trinket in that safe, is now part of a criminal investigation and a corporate bankruptcy proceeding." I explained, my tone as crisp and impersonal as a legal document. "I don't have the authority to release anything. In fact, allowing you to remove a potential asset would be a felony. I'd lose my license, my company, everything." I paused, letting the legal finality of it sink in. "You of all people should understand the consequences of wanting things that don't belong to you." The last sentence was a scalpel, precise and aimed at the heart of her entire problem. Her eyes widened in fury. "That's a footnote in a very large, very sad story." I looked past her toward the elevator bank. "The building is locked down. Security will be here in 2 minutes to escort you out. Please don't make this difficult." The fight went out of her eyes, replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness. She looked at me one last time, a look of pure, unadulterated loathing mixed with a desperate, dawning understanding that she had well and truly lost. Not just Julian, not just the money, but any claim she might have had on my past or my present. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. I didn't watch her go. I walked back to the desk, sat down in the CEO's chair, and looked at the screen. The complex web of shell companies and fraudulent transactions was still there, a puzzle waiting to be solved. I took a deep breath, the air in the office suddenly feeling cleaner, lighter. The surgeon had removed the tumor. Now it was time to get back to the operation. I picked up my coffee, took a sip, and started typing. The past was not just closed, it was excised. And I, for the first time in a very long time, felt completely and utterly whole. The ride down in the elevator was silent. I watched the floor numbers descend, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as if I had just observed a scene from a play instead of living it. When I stepped out into the cool night air, I didn't feel the surge of power I might have expected. I didn't feel the cold satisfaction of revenge. I felt clean, as if a low-grade fever I hadn't even known I had finally broken. I drove home through the sleeping city, the streetlights smearing into ribbons of gold on the wet pavement. Noah was waiting up for me, reading on the couch, Leo asleep at his feet. He looked up as I came in, his eyes full of a gentle, unspoken question. "It's over," I said, my voice quiet. He closed his book and patted the cushion next to him. I sat down, and he wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against. His chest. I didn't cry. I didn't recount the conversation in detail. I just sat there, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat anchor me to the present. She looked so small. I whispered into the darkness of the living room. She was trying so hard to hold on to a glittering lie, and all it did was shatter in her hands. Noah stroked my hair. "You're not just a surgeon, Elena," he said softly. "A surgeon cuts things out. You're a healer. You go into the wound, and you figure out how to make it whole again." His words settled deep inside me. He was right. My job wasn't just to excise the cancer of Julian Croft's fraud. It was to heal the organization he had infected, to save what could be saved for the people who deserved it most. The next morning, I woke up with a thought so clear and insistent it felt like it had been delivered to me in a dream. She was desperate for the necklace. Not the money in the bank accounts, not the apartment, not the clothes. The necklace. Why? A woman like Sarah, whose entire identity was tied up in monetary value and status, wouldn't be desperate for a single piece of jewelry, no matter how many carats it was, unless its value was something other than what it appeared. I got out of bed, leaving Noah to sleep, and poured myself a cup of coffee. I stood by the window, looking out at the city waking up, and turned the thought over and over in my mind. She said it was the only thing of value she had left. But what if its value wasn't in the diamonds? What if its value was in the information? I grabbed my laptop and started digging, not into the financial records this time, but into Sarah. Social media, old public profiles, event photos. I found a picture of her from a charity gala 6 months ago. She was wearing a stunning diamond pendant, a delicate, modernist design. I zoomed in. The clasp looked bulky, unusual. It was a long shot, a wild, intuitive leap, but it was the only thread I had. I called Marcus Thorne. "I need to open." "Julian Croft's personal safe," I said, without preamble. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Voss, the contents have been inventoried. There's nothing of legal significance in there. Some watches, a bit of cash, and some jewelry belonging to Ms. Jenkins." "I need to see the necklace," I insisted. "The diamond pendant." "Elena, we don't have time for this. The forensic accountants are breathing down our necks." "Marcus, this isn't a hunch. It's a psychological profile. Julian Croft was a narcissist. He wouldn't keep his real secrets on a company server. He'd keep them close, in a place he thought was brilliant, a place no one would think to look. And he'd give it to the one person he trusted, the person who was as invested in the lie as he was. He made her his high priestess. He'd give her the keys to the kingdom." Another longer pause. I could hear him breathing. "The clasp," I added softly. "It's not just a clasp, is it?" I heard a sharp intake of breath. "I'll meet you there in an hour," he said. An hour later, I stood with Marcus and a locksmith in the now familiar CEO's office. The safe was a state-of-the-art biometric model embedded in the wall, but the authorities had already overridden its security. The locksmith swung the heavy door open. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, lay the treasures of stolen life. Rolexes, a stack of $100 bills, and, in the center, the diamond pendant. It was even more beautiful up close, the stones catching the light with a cold fire. Marcus picked it up with a gloved hand. The inventory report just lists it as a diamond pendant, valued at approximately $80,000. "Turn it over," I said. He did. The clasp was indeed unusually large and complex, a small, silver mechanism that didn't look like it belonged with the delicate chain of the necklace. He fiddled with it for a moment before a tiny, almost invisible seam popped open. The clasp wasn't a clasp. It was a casing, and nestled. Inside was a micro SD card, so small it looked like a speck of dust. Marcus stared at it, his expression for the first time showing something other than grim resignation. It was awe. My God, he breathed. The real books. The real everything. I corrected him. His escape plan. The hidden accounts. The names of his co-conspirators. It's all here. The next 48 hours were a blur. The card was handed over to the federal authorities, who worked around the clock to decrypt its contents. What they found was a treasure trove of evidence, so comprehensive it was staggering. It was the blueprint of the entire fraud, meticulously detailed by Croft himself, a testament to his own ego. It led them to a series of hidden accounts in Switzerland and Luxembourg, and more importantly, to his location. He hadn't fled to some non-extradition country. He was hiding in plain sight in a luxury villa in Tuscany, living under an assumed name, confident he had outsmarted everyone. 2 days after I found the card, I saw the news alert on my phone. Fugitive tech CEO Julian Croft apprehended in Italy. I closed my laptop and walked out onto the balcony of my apartment. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. The city was beginning to glitter with its own lights. I had done it. I had walked into the heart of the wreckage of my past and had not only survived it, I had dismantled it. I had healed the wound. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Noah. Asterisk coming home. Pizza and wine on me. Asterisk I smiled, a real deep, uncomplicated smile. The surgeon had completed her operation. The healer had done her work. And now it was time to go home. The pizza and wine tasted like victory, but not the sharp, bitter kind I had once craved. This was a quiet, savory victory, the kind you share with the person who helped you win the war, not just the battle. We sat on the floor of our living room, a sea of cardboard boxes from our recent move still waiting to be unpacked, and talked about everything and nothing. We talked about getting a bigger dog, maybe a friend for Leo. We talked about the book Noah was struggling to finish. We talked about taking a real vacation, somewhere with no cell service and an ocean that stretched on forever. We didn't talk about Julian Croft. We didn't talk about Sarah. They were phantoms, and our life was real. The next morning, the phantoms came knocking. It started with a single email from a journalist I'd never heard of from a business publication I respected. The subject line was "The Woman Who Caught Croft." My blood went cold. They knew. Somehow, they knew my role. I deleted the email, but it was too late. It was the first crack in the dam. Within an hour, my phone was ringing with unknown numbers. My work email was flooded. A news van appeared at the entrance to our apartment building. The quiet, peaceful life I had built was suddenly under siege. The old Elena, the predictable Elena, would have panicked. She would have pulled the blinds, turned off her phone, and hidden until the storm passed. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I stood at the window, looking down at the reporters setting up their cameras, and felt a strange sense of calm. This was the final frontier, the last test. I had conquered my past, but could I conquer its public perception? Noah came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "The circus has arrived," he said softly. "It has," I agreed. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to go down there," I said, the decision forming as I spoke the words. "What?" he asked, turning me to face him, his eyes wide with concern. "Elena, you don't have to do that. We can call Marcus. We can get a restraining order. We can wait them out." "No," I said, my voice firm. "Hiding is what the old Elena would have done. It's what Sarah would expect me to do. If I run, they'll frame the narrative. I'll be a mystery, a recluse, a source of speculation. I won't let them tell my story. I'm going." To tell it myself, I saw the understanding dawn in his eyes. He wasn't just my anchor. He was my sail. "Okay," he said. "What do you need from me?" "A blazer." I said with a small smile. And to make sure Leo doesn't chew up the shoes I'm about to put on. I walked out of the building into a cacophony of flashing lights and shouted questions. It was disorienting, a wall of noise and energy. I held up a hand, not in a gesture of surrender, but of command. I will take one question, I said, my voice cutting through the din with a surprising authority. And I will give one statement. After that, I have work to do. The noise subsided slightly, a sea of faces and microphones turning toward me. A young woman in the front, a reporter from the first publication that had emailed me, asked the question, Ms. Voss, how did you know where to find the evidence? What led you to the safe? I looked at her, then at the cameras, and I saw not just reporters, but an audience. Millions of people who had followed the story of Croft's downfall. This was my chance to speak not just to them, but to the Mayas of the world, to the people who show up and do the work and believe in things that are real. It wasn't about finding evidence, I said, my voice clear and steady. It was about understanding people. Julian Croft was a man who built a life based on a performance. And people like that can't help but leave a script. They can't help but hide the most important things in the most obvious places because they believe their own genius is a disguise. The real story here isn't about a clever investigator. The real story is about the 150 employees of Innovate Dynamics who came to work every day believing they were building something real. My focus, and the focus of my team, is not on the man who broke the law, but on the people who are now trying to rebuild their lives. That is where the real story is. That's all I have to say. I turned and walked back into the building. Leaving a stunned silence in my wake. I hadn't mentioned Sarah. I hadn't gloated. I hadn't made it about me. I had used their platform to redefine the narrative, to shift the focus from the villain to the victims, from the drama to the integrity. That night, a segment about me aired on the national news. They used the clip of my statement. Noah and I watched it on the couch, Leo's head in my lap. I looked calm, confident, and in control. I looked like a stranger. Wow, Noah said, turning off the TV. You're kind of a badass. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that filled the room. I guess I am. Miles away, in a sparsely furnished rented room, Sarah Jenkins watched the same news report. She saw the woman she had once called predictable and safe standing before a bank of cameras, not with arrogance, but with a quiet, unshakable power. She heard her reframe the entire narrative, not with anger, but with compassion for the very people Sarah had once looked down upon. She saw the woman she had thrown away become the hero of a story she was no longer a part of. And as the screen went dark, reflecting her own pale, tear-streaked face back at her, she finally understood. It wasn't that Elena had become extraordinary. It was that she had been extraordinary all along. And she, Sarah, had been too blind to see it. 6 months later, Noah and I were sitting on a beach in Thailand, the sand warm between our toes, the ocean a brilliant, impossible shade of turquoise. My business was thriving under the leadership of my team, who were more than capable of handling things without me for a few weeks. The story of Innovate Dynamics had faded from the headlines, replaced by the next scandal, the next drama. I was no longer a hero or a villain in the public eye. I was just a woman on vacation. I looked over at Noah, who was trying to teach Leo to fetch a piece of driftwood, and felt a wave of love so profound it almost hurt. I thought about the list I had once burned, the words. Exciting, passionate, risk-taking, extraordinary. Asterisk, I had chased those words. I had conquered them. I had embodied them. But sitting there with the sun on my skin and the sound of the ocean in my ears, I realized they no longer mattered. They were just words. The real victory wasn't becoming extraordinary. It was realizing that you didn't need to be. I was no longer the woman Sarah had tried to define. I was no longer the surgeon who had excised her past. I was just Elena, a woman who loved and was loved. A woman who had built a life of purpose and peace. And as I closed my eyes and tilted my face toward the sun, I knew, with a certainty that filled every corner of my soul, that it was more than enough.